the first prescription drug he was really given was Ritalin because he was hyperactive at the time, they thought. And there is quite a bit of medical literature debating whether it's a positive thing to give kids at that point. Many people find that it helps calm kids down, but there are others who argue that by letting kids think that drugs can affect their mood and getting them sort of hooked on this cycle of drugs can control you psychologically, they've argued that kids that took Ritalin are more likely to do drugs later in life. There are some other studies who argue the opposite, so exactly what the scientific data is, I don't know. But there were some in Kurt's life who felt that his early prescription use of Ritalin probably began his lifelong use of prescription and non-prescription drugs.
I think that he was very troubled by the fact that he couldn't go anywhere without being recognized and asked for autographs and mobbed. Couldn't get through dinner without a lot of people asking him to talk to him and telling him how great he was. I think even though Chris was more recognizable, I think Chris had an easier time of dealing with it. And unfortunately, I think he decided to turn to drugs to help relieve the pain of that and the stress. Because people forget too that becoming a millionaire in a short period of time is also just as stressful as losing your job and losing a lot of money.
Heroin, which is a drug that is most closely associated with Kurt Cobain in the popular literature and the popular myth, really was a drug he didn't begin doing until the last 3 years of his life.
This is a launch for an album of the biggest band in the world, and the singer ODs. You break into his bedroom, you hear a scream, you break in to find him slumped behind the door with a syringe, and Kelly, you remember Kelly, the nanny, rushed in and smacked him in the solar plexus, and he came round. And then you're going downstairs, it always reminds me of a spitting image with Brezhnev going, "Oh, we may have had a little accident with our nuclear power station," and a friend of mine.
It's like the interview could be delayed 15 minutes.
Type of thing.
I think it's a real shame that he turned to heroin. I think it's. I wish he would have found a better way to deal with things. Either, I don't know if he needed antidepressants or just if he should have tried to maybe not tour as much and stay out of the public eye and just back off a little bit and gradually ease into becoming more famous instead of. They did a lot of touring. They did a lot of shows. They were out there a lot. Those couple of years before he ended up dying.
I think it's unfortunate that Kurt is so painted in this image as a junkie when the truth is that heroin certainly became a huge problem for him and played a big role in his death, but that was really only the last few years of his life. Most of his life, he actually was a fairly sober and sane person.
How should we remember Kurt? By playing his music.
The fact that we're talking about Kurt Cobain's music 10 years after the guy died explains a lot. It tells us that his music meant something.
The songs Cobain wrote touched the generation that grew up listening to that, and then remarkably it has now touched a successive generation.
The comparison game, it drives me up the wall, Oh, he was like this or he was like that. No, actually it wasn't like any of that.
Nirvana's popularity today is entirely down to Nirvana's music. There's plenty of bands who were around 10, 15 years ago from that general scene who have gone and whose music won't be troubling us again.
Any reputation is that he should or deserve or whatever, has to be just made on a base comparison on what this individual did.
I would just hope that he'd be remembered more as not just as a musician or someone that flamed out dying of a drug overdose, but somebody that was artistic, that did a lot of paintings, that did a lot of writing, that cared about other people, and things that are going on in the world, not just himself, and as well as his music. But there's a lot of things involved to it besides just Nirvana.
For as long as people are curious and are interested in rock music, then Nirvana will be there because their music mattered.
Cobain, to a number of the kids that are even growing up today, has almost become like a stop you make in adolescence. I would compare him, on a literary side to J.D. Salinger, where when I grew up, my generation, we all read Salinger's work. It's something you had to read to sort of understand adolescence. Nirvana's music, I think, plays the same musical role. It is so tied into those feelings of youth that today I see so many kids going up that end up going back to Cobain as something that they find meaning in their own lives from.
I go to gigs now and I see kids And they are kids. They're like, you know, some as young as sort of 13 to 15 years old, wearing Nirvana T-shirts and stuff. So, you know, some of those people were barely born. You know, were not born when Nirvana were making their music, and yet, you know, those people know Nirvana's music now.
So ultimately, I think that was Kurt's greatest gift to us. He put so much of himself into his songs that when we listen to it, they seem so emotionally true. They almost can't be denied.